Hey, welcome back to Bridal Sewing Techniques, and today we're going to talk about how to hem a beaded edged gown. This is something that is super pertinent right now. I know a lot of you are right in the middle of prom season, so many of us are busy in our shops with both prom and bridal, and we certainly see this style hem for both seasons. So let's get right into it. When it comes to hemming a beaded gown, we need to be very sensitive to the design of the gown. Fitting room conversations with the bride or the prom goer are going to be critical in this case, okay? So what we would typically do if they want to keep this edge and we have the problem of not having a waist seam, which is a very common issue with the gowns. They don't give us a waist seam for us to be able to just take it up at the waist. When we're looking at that kind of situation, we need to just look basically at the bottom of the dress to figure out what we're going to do. Typically what you need to do is you need to find a part in the design that looks like it would lend itself to being separated there. And sometimes it is a separate applique, but a lot of times this is all just beaded together on one piece of tulle or net or whatever the fabric is. It's most commonly a tulle or a net or a mesh. But you're gonna find, if it's not something that you can just pick off, you're gonna find a new edge that looks like it would be pretty natural to the design, and you're going to cut along that edge. Just cut along it. Okay, this is a temporary thing, and you explain to your client that it's temporary. Now you're going to kind of separate it from the sides there, and then you're going to have a dress with this raw edge that is still likely too long. What you need to do then is mark the length that the dress needs to be in the end, and you're going to cut all of this off, and you can measure your total of the skirt fabric that this applique piece that you have now made is going to cover. So you can even cut it just a shade shorter so that you know that none of this mesh or tulle is going to peek out when there's a swing when there's a swing edge. All right, so after you get that right, and you can even do a fit check if you're nervous, and this should just be a little bit off of the ground if they're wanting floor length. Then you're going to pin this piece that you separated. You're going to just pin it up on here. And see how I made the bottom part of the swing piece to be the floor length. So that is how you would deal with this if you were working with it from the perspective of treating the edge of the gown like it is an applique. Now the other thing that you can do, and the example piece that I'm dealing with for this video, I'm getting ready to show you this on an actual dress. What we're dealing with here is the bride actually wanted a cleaner edge. She did not want the scalloped edge. She felt like there was enough going on up higher in the dress. So she wanted a straighter edge. Also, the swings were really drastic on her dress. So if this was floor length, you would still have a good bit of her feet showing. And then if you hemmed it to where this was floor length, she had all this on the floor and it was very trippy. So that just made her very, very nervous. So she wanted to have a straighter edge, even though she was still having some swings going on. She wanted this straighter edge going on. And so we complied with that. And you may find that. You may find a bride or a prom goer that's like, I don't like scallop at all. They may want all of the scallop removed and they just want a nice, you know, straight edge hem, and then let the beadwork do its thing up here. That's perfectly valid. It is their dress. I want to show you these different choices because you probably are going to come across different choices, particularly as the trends change. So where do we need to clear away the beads? I know we're talking about having to clear away the beads in order to have a clear path to sew. So picture where you're going to sew. So that means when you get this pinned on, you're gonna have to have a clear path to sew on the underside. That's the skirt. Wherever the edge of this applique is, that's where you're going to have to clear your beads away. I don't clear away the beads on the top layer because you can clearly see them when you're sewing and they add dimension. The beads that I want to clear away are any that would be trapped between the applique and the skirt. Now, like we mentioned, not everybody has a scalloped edge or an applique edge. So let's talk about a hem that has a straight edge. So let's picture this as where we cut the dress. And then this is where it's going to have to be folded in order to hem it. It's just a single rolled hem is what we're talking about here. So I wouldn't feel like I had to clear away all of these beads through here, but I would certainly clear away these. Because when I fold it under and I need to stitch through here, you'll see on the machine I can sew, lift up over these beads that are on the top layer, sew, lift up over, sew, lift up over. And then this way you don't have two beads wedged right close in a seam. So that's how we're going to determine where we clear away the beads for a hem on a beaded dress. Just a pro tip in case any of you are not familiar with actually altering a beaded gown. In order to alter, like at the, say at the side seams or something like that, if we're going to have to alter in like this, we're going to have to clear away all the beads through there so that we can sew it together and not have beads caught in the seam work. Obviously, there are some details to the sewing that we need to address with this project. So if we were to just, pin this applique on, obviously it's still not sewn. That's a problem. And you're also going to have continual bead loss. The way that beads are sewn on is usually kind of continuous. So you'll have a stitch running. This is kind of like a magnified view going through the beads. So that if you were to remove one of the beads, you now have this loose thread and these other guys can come loose. And that's going to be a problem. So the way we do that is with a product called Hypo Cement. You can put this clear cement at the root, and I'll link to this in the description, but you can put the clear cement to the root of the threads. It has a pinpoint applicator, and this is clear. Nobody's gonna see this, but you're gonna touch it to the threads, and you're just gonna do it like, maybe once, twice, 3 times. And that is going to prevent the bead loss. Always check that with the fabric. Make sure you don't have a fabric that's going to dissolve when it meets with this kind of chemical. It does stink a little bit at first. It kind of smells like nail polish or something, but it dries quickly and then it doesn't smell anymore. If you don't want to do that, then you need to go through a couple of beads above your final bead and knot your thread off and just go through and re-sew this. Come back through here and knot this off on the back side. That's the way I would do that if you want to resolve the future bead loss with sewing. If you go this route, you need to make sure you charge a lot of money because it's going to take a very, very long time to do that. This would be more considered like an heirloom sewing technique rather than just dealing with the adhesive. So the next step is getting the applique piece pinned on, and you can even have a try on at this point, raise and lower it as needed. Make sure it's in just the right spot. You can do that, or if they're actually wanting it hemmed and made into a straight edge, or if it started out with a straight edge and it needed to be hemmed in the same style, then you need to fold it under and pin it to make sure the length is correct. To begin attaching this on or hemming it in a rolling fashion, I like to start with fusible webbing. So I use my fusible tape and I make sure that it's a very light tape that is going to disappear when I iron it. I don't want this to be seen through the dress in any way. So they do come in like a heavier or a lighter style. See how this one's a little bit thicker? So each type that you get, heavier or lighter, is going to have a little bit more going on there. But I like to fuse it in place. And, you know, just make sure that your iron is set to nylon. A professional iron would be best in this situation because the steam can really heat it up real quick. But the sole plate is not super hot because you do not want to melt any tulle or mesh or anything. Now that you have fused the hem in a few places, I particularly like to use the fusing when we're tucking a straight hem edge under. A lot of times, if it's kind of a more complicated shape, I just have a lot of pins in there. And of course, if it's a really open net, we do have problems with the pins slipping out. So that's another reason why you might like the fusible. Or some people like to do safety pins, but I find that they can kind of be bulky. They can get in the way when you're doing your free motion sewing for the hem. But once we have this fused in place or pinned in place, whatever your preference may be, it is time to stitch it together. You basically have two choices. One is going to be to hand stitch it together, which a lot of people find very relaxing and they love hand stitching a hem. Now, if you are working in a shop that has stricter time constraints and you've got to work very fast, you don't have the luxury of hand stitching, or you don't want to charge your client for hand stitching, then the next best option is going to be doing the free motion stitch. That's actually my preferred method. The free motion stitch is done on the sewing machine. If you're not sure how to do free motion stitch with your sewing machine, I do have a video, and I will link to it in the description, that shows you how to free motion on several different types of machines. So don't feel like you have to buy a commercial machine or an industrial machine in order to free motion stitch. You also don't have to buy a super expensive quilting machine to do it as well.